Right, so this is the May 18th public recording, SIG scalability meeting. Okay, so I think just to quickly reiterate what we were just talking about before I hit the record button, Tim, you're going to do a PSA at the community meeting today if there's a slot for us.
I can just make a PSA. I'll make it at the end of the agenda because usually there's always like PSAs at the end of the agenda.
Okay. All right. One thing for today, David, you're going to take notes. One thing is I wanted to get some feedback on the cluster config sizing for scalability testing conversations I've been having, and I actually have a couple of slides I wanted to show. Any other business besides that?
So just FYI, I finally last week shared the initial version of doc with like SLIs we would like to introduce.
Right.
Like it would be great if you could take a look and we can discuss it like maybe next week if you have any questions, concerns, suggestions, and stuff like that. So
what does I mean?
On the agenda.
SLI is like service level indicator, which is like metrics we would like to measure, and on top of them, we can build our SLOs, which basically SLO is an SLI plus a threshold that we would like to meet.
Sounds good. So we'll put that on the agenda for next week.
Yeah, that's cool. Yep.
All right. Should I share screen?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm going to try to share it from my desktop here. Can I do it? Does that still work? Okay. So my main disclaimer, yeah, I know PowerPoint, but I needed to draw pictures and I already had some materials built. So I'll get this into a different doc format, but this was the most efficient way to do things. Okay, so just starting point here. This is the basic 3-node configuration that we're talking about for this configuration. I think the one question still remains as to whether running a load balancer in front of an API server is really the right thing to do or not. I think the right thing to do is actually change this and say no, and go to a master election, just run with a single API server.
So I talked with the etcd guys about whether or not quorum reads were defaulted on for etcd 3.x and later.
Yes.
And it is. So no matter what we're doing behind the scenes, we can load balance the API servers because they are doing quorum reads on all the reads. So there was a question when we had this original transition period, which is like last release cycle, where we uncovered that there's race conditions on certain scenarios where you could get stale data. And that should no longer exist with the latest versions of etcd. And the I/O performance problems, which are in 3.1. Also, Wojtek, just to clarify, what version are we shipping of etcd? Are we shipping for the 1.7 release?
I think it's not yet decided. That's my feeling.
Because in order for you to fix the IOP problem, a 3.1 needs to be in place because there's still an IOP issue that exists prior to 3.1 with the defaulted quorum reads.
Well, what version is shipping with 1.6 presently of etcd?
3.0.17, I believe. Still
Yes.
has the IOP problem.
Okay.
Like it doesn't mean that everyone is using it, but that's the default one for the release. And it seems like still some providers didn't like change the default, I think. Like for example, Cops, I think.
Yeah, COPS has been super conservative on rolling forward even from etcd2 to etcd3.
That, I mean, to be honest, that's Justin's call, right?
Yeah.
Like, and we shouldn't, dictate what he should do, but I don't think he's privy to all the information of what that means at certain scales and how it affects things.
And really, like we don't. I don't think we should really care that much about any specific provisioning tools default configuration in this conversation. That's probably outside of scope.
From a high level, though, what is the argument for etcd3? My vague understanding, if I were to compare blog posts, is that we couldn't get from 2,000 nodes to 5,000 nodes without etcd3. Is there any
Correct.
other reason?
Yes. So basically, the biggest change is Watch, how Watch is implemented in etcd3. And it's like,
and the three-phase commit process. Right?
And
I guess the question is, does etcd3 matter to people who are trying to run less than 2,000 nodes? Or is etcd2 just fine for them?
If you're running a highly available configuration, you need to make sure that quorum reads is turned on. Otherwise, you encounter that race condition that I was talking about.
Got it. That's the one. Thank you.
And Tim, you said 3.1.7 etcd still has the IO problem?
No, 3.1, anything greater than 3.1 no longer has the IO problem on quorum reads.
Okay.
And the reason why that's so bad is if you're running something that's like, if you're running a crap version of an IOP limited Amazon account, you can run out of IOPS, if you're thrashing etcd, which that will basically cause you to lose leaders periodically and have your schedulers and controller managers bouncing all over.
Right.
So just if I can walk through, the reason you would care about quorum read is if you care about having a highly available API server, because the IO-based problem really only manifests itself when you have multiple API servers concurrently hitting multiple etcd servers. Because like for the scalability tests, I'm pretty sure we just stand up a single master with everything on it, right? So that wouldn't necessarily hit the quorum read problem. But if you want to make sure you have an API servers up, why would you do that? Well, our scalability tests seem to prove that you don't have to do that for scalability reasons, but for availability reasons, you definitely have to.
Yep.
yes.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So I think that going forward here, I can make a note here that we should assume a 3.1 etcd implementation. Or I don't know, maybe that's out of scope. This configuration that I'm showing here with balanced API servers, 3 nodes, 3 etcd, is close enough.
Yeah. So what upstream ships with and qualifies with is currently it's 3.0.17 still. Is that correct, Wojtek?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true.
That's the one they've tested. But the client side the client side tooling inside of the repository has already been enabled for 3.1. So anybody can swap in, etcd 3.1 and they shouldn't have a problem.
Right. Okay.
I think we can definitely build an image at least, even if we don't change the default. So.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. So that's good. I think this is the other topic that has swirled around a bit around this, which is kind of 3 nodes versus 5 nodes. And I think where we're coming down on this is that the one reason you would do a 5 node is that you're trying to maintain 100% availability during an upgrade, where you're losing a node for the upgrade and then you lose a second node as a result of some other failure. And my incomplete bullet here was, the incomplete bullet was cluster operators are going to do upgrades during a time when they can tolerate some amount of risk there. And so we should, for scalability purposes here, we should standardize on a 3 node cluster as opposed to a 5-node cluster. But it is debatable, so I wanted to bring it up and see what the...
To be honest, I have never met, besides Google, in the cloud, I have never met anybody who runs at the scale of 1,000 plus that doesn't have a 5-node environment.
So
if you're doing several hundred and you care about things, 3 is common. But once you get to the point where you care a lot about availability, it's like a trade-off of availability and upgradability. I've never seen in the wild anyone at the 1,000-node scale that doesn't use 5.
So do we want to, I can totally accept that. Do we want to do 3 and 5 or then just jump straight to 5? Do like 1-node and 5-node?
I think you want to say these are the trade-offs for 3 and 5. I would say depending upon the people and how much they care, they might want to choose A or B. I don't think we should just basically say if you care about high availability, make it greater than 1.
Right. So I think it's outside the scope of this group to worry about the failure case of a scalability test. Like we're not trying to do the actual testing of the HA and failure scenarios, but just to have for the normal case a configuration that is reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
We would expect etcd performance to be a bit different on 5 nodes versus 3 potentially. So
I think, well,
do both or do 5, I think is the main trade-off for now.
How much harder is it to do both? I mean, if you automate 5,
maybe it's not that much harder.
Well, it all depends because how long does it take you to run the scalability test, Wojtek?
Currently, it's like 15 hours or something like that.
But I think yeah.
So it sounds like 5's a requirement, and then it's just a question of do we want to spend the time to do 3 also?
Yeah, I wanted to say that maybe we can do 5 for larger clusters and 3 for smaller, but actually I think it doesn't make sense because for smaller clusters, the tests are faster anyway, so.
Exactly. I think 5 makes more sense because that's like, if you're running for the 5,000 node environment, you want the no-win scenario, right? You want the worst of all worlds.
All right. I will rewrite this accordingly. That sounds acceptable.
Yeah, 5 is still in 5,000 node cluster. 5 is still 1 promille, so it's like.
Okay, that's great. I will work on that. So in terms of cluster config is one piece. The node sizing, instance sizing, whatever you want to call it, for that is another. This might be a little bit old. I think this is roughly the configuration that the 5,000 node testing runs on now.
The master machine is like 64 cores, but it's like 240 gigs of RAM or something like that. It's like pretty huge number.
I think well, hold that thought. I think that it needs to have at least 18 gigs of RAM. That's like is that the
okay.
Function of the system? Like you've got a ton of wasted memory. Right?
Yes, though I think it's more than 18 gigs. Like we definitely have a lot of spare resources in terms of RAM there, but I think it's more. But like I can't remember from the top of my head.
Okay, I'll look at this. I'll look at this again just to see that this was like scraping from some earlier conversation. So I'll update this to 5. So part of one of the things that I said we would do is we had a meeting with some of the AWS folks and wanted to get their input on this specifically. And so I went through this scenario with them. And one of the things that we started with is we have a lot of experience on AWS. So what we did was try to pick a node type that was similar to the scope of the previous one and say, well, why don't we use that? And it's not the biggest thing that Amazon has, but it's probably, upper middle. It's an upper middle class node, you might say. And it's a C4 8x large. And so we think that's a good starting point. AWS folks said, Yeah, that looks about right. I mean, as long as we're able to change it later if it looks like there's an issue going on. The AWS team is also willing to review. So when we make a little bit further in terms of documentation, they're happy to be involved, and that'll be great. So related to that was the question about the IOPS that you were just raising, Tim. So our proposal here is that the standard config for the testing should run split etcd, and there is some additional proposed. So this is a little bit more Amazon specific. With that, comment on the Google case a bit more. But the notion of setting the 2 etcd clusters up on dedicated IOPS volumes, I guess we felt, and the Amazon folks both felt, that this would make the configuration a bit more predictable and easy to debug.
Can I ask a question real quick? Why do you have 6 etcd blocks in this picture?
Because you're running 2 etcd, the horizontal layers there is split etcd, a 3-node cluster for events and 1 for cluster state.
It's kind of crazy. I think you'd want to. I know Upstream does the split etcd for resource on events, but I think 99.9% of clusters don't do that.
Well, other than Google, right?
Well, Google originally did it because we had degenerative scenarios in the code where we would spam events like in crazy fashion, right? That was a problem, and Ken's been digging into that recently and uncovering some of the weird counter effects that people have made to prevent the excessive spamming. But no one really runs that way.
Yeah, and my thoughts are mostly on getting the events out of etcd to begin with, or maybe making etcd just one of the places that they'll go.
Well, sorry, you were breaking up a little. Can you repeat?
Yeah, I'm gonna be probably giving that proposal next week, but it's gonna be potentially looking at, for the really kind of high scale scenarios, getting the events out of etcd to begin with. So
I think that Tim has said that on this call a whole bunch of times, like probably more than a year of agreeing with that point. So and I think we would view it the same way. In effect, this configuration is like a baby step in that direction to try to separate the event stream into something else.
So
while
I would
I'm on the subject, is there existing proposals for that if it's been going on for this long? I've been looking at lots of GitHub issues, but is there any documents?
Tim, didn't you just close one along this line?
No, I closed one of them, which was the webhook. Like I wanted to add a webhook, and Daniel poo-pooed it. Because every time I try to mock the API, it gets all territorial. But I originally wanted to have a very, very simple webhook, similar to how we do webhooks for everything else. So that way I just completely offload it from the main system. I might reopen that or revisit that topic.
So let me understand. For a while, we've said that etcd and etcd events, or i.e. split etcd, may not be necessary. Tim, you're saying nobody runs that in the wild. Are we saying that we think it's not necessary? Or is it still an open question?
It's an open question.
If given an abundance of caution in a production environment, why wouldn't you do this?
Well, because the answer is pretty simple, is that people don't, if you don't have a certain level of multi-tenancy you care about, is you just create another cluster, right? So the answer that most people have is they don't want one large multi-tenant environment all the time, is they just create multiple clusters.
Right. Okay, so the alternative proposal here would be a separate set of instances for the etcd configuration, as opposed to lumping them in with the API server scheduler, blah, blah, blah.
That's not really what I said, but
No, well,
I don't understand what Tim you are suggesting.
So like the reason for splitting events on a very large cluster is that you can run out of space. Well, especially in the etcd2 scenario, you could have run out of key space because you had degenerative cases where you were spamming so many events, you just fill up etcd, right? And also there's a throughput constraint, right? So
yeah, the initial reason why we did it was basically the latency and throughput of etcd. Like two separate etcds were handling it much better. I'm not sure if it's still the case with 3.0 or 3.1. We didn't measure it, if we can get rid of it, but yeah. But like the reason that you mentioned about like filling the space is potentially another reason.
Yeah, but when we saw configurations in the wild, like when we, before I moved to Heptio, there was never a scenario where we did resource splitting on larger clusters. It just didn't happen.
Again, Tim, out of an abundance of caution here on this, wouldn't we want to start with something similar to what I'm showing here and split it, and then in the course of doing the scalability testing, if it's clear that that's overkill, then we can back off?
Yeah, we can always revisit this, right?
Yes, that's what I wanted to say. I think it's not that once we decide we can't change it, we can change it easily or relatively easily. So I think that start treating it as a starting point and like potentially revisiting in like a quarter or something. If that doesn't make sense, it appears that it doesn't make sense. It's like a good way to do it.
Yep, agreed.
Okay. There was my pitch for doing it this way. Okay, so provider input. So we got some input from AWS. That's great. I reached out to both Gabe and Brendan at Azure and asked if they were interested in having some input on this. I assume they can find somebody on their team that would be interested as well. I haven't actually gotten the input yet, but I'm putting it on the queue of things to work on. Again, the goal with Azure would be the same as with AWS. I think follow-ups here, once we can make a little bit more progress here, I do think to-do list is to coordinate, get the provider SIGs. I don't know, is there an Azure SIG yet? Not yet. Presumably there will be. I think the Amazon folks are trying to participate more in SIG AWS anyway, so this may roughly be the same review anyway. And then a question, which is, I've got this Google Doc, which is, I've got words in a Google Doc and pictures in PowerPoint, and I need to fuse the two, which is just a bit of admin work for me. But where should I put this? Should I do a PR on the goals or create a new page and link off, or what do you think, Wojtek?
I think there is we started some like page in community repo with how we would think the setup should, like how we would think with SLOs should be defined. So I think there is a place for like cluster setup. How should cluster setup look like there? So maybe there, but I will try to look into it and can you like add it to the meeting notes and add a comment to me? I will try to send links to you maybe.
You'll try to give me a pointer to the best place to plug this stuff in. Great, thank you.
Maybe it might not be the best place, but like it might be my suggestion. Maybe let's try it.
I looked through it and I was finding myself to be somewhat unopinionated about where it should go. So if you have an opinion, that'll be great. Okay. I think that concludes my comments for that topic today. I have some more work to do.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Like this is
great.
Useful that we finally have something in this area.
Back to the Golang thing real quick. At a high level, do we anticipate having a decision on that before June 1st?
defined decision. Like,
Yeah.
Decision of whether or not Kubernetes 1.7 will be built with a patched version of Golang, or
Oh, this
version
one.
1.8 that has a bug fix in it, or what the final call is.
So,
that would be
so
something before code
from what I know from Go team, they will decide whether there will be a patch release or not either this week, which apparently still didn't happen, or next week. Like by the end of next week, there should be a decision whether there will be a patch release or not of Go.
Okay.
And if there will be, then we will definitely upgrade to this new patch release. If there won't be, we will stick to this patch. Like this patch is super small also, so.
Yeah, the problem with, we can't revert back to 1.7 because there are other changes that are dependent upon 1.8 now.
Yeah, search rotation is, for example, a feature that there is supposed to be in 1.8 and 1.7, and like Kubernetes 1.7, and like it heavily depends on Go 1.8.
Yeah.
But there's, I think there's also some other feature, but I can't remember which one.
All right. Would people outside of Google be able to build Kubernetes the same way that Kubernetes would be built for release if there was a patched Golang? Like, would I have to patch my own install of Golang and then use that to build Kubernetes?
So, what we are doing is we are building in Docker anyway. So assuming that you are building somehow the same way, like you can potentially reuse the same container to build.
Yeah, but like distros can't do that. So distro vendors, which include like, not excluding CoreOS, but like Debian and Red Hat variants can't do that.
They can't?
Nope. There's very strict policies and guidelines on how they build and how source is maintained throughout the whole process and the build tree and everything else. Right? Super strict.
Okay. Let's really, really hope that there's a patch release. I don't know how to explain this otherwise.
So the take home is that this will be decided next week. Is someone own updating the SIG about it?
Sounds like we're dependent on the Go team.
Yeah, we can't really force them to do patch release. Like I talked with them and like they know where we are, like, and maybe like I should pass the argument that the team just gave about that, like in some distros you can't do it. You can't use.
That seems like a very worthwhile argument to pass along.
Well, the distro could patch their version of Go. That
Yes.
they can do that, but they can't do like the containerized build mechanics.
Yeah, which means like you still can. It's doable, but it will potentially involve more work.
Yep.
Than what we already did, and was like patching on Kubernetes side was relatively simple. And
okay, just as long as there's documentation of how to do it, if that's the path we have to go down, that includes sounds like it needs to include more than just the run of the Dockerized build process. Because I agree, the Dockerized build process, I thought the whole point of that was to make sure all the dependencies were baked in. I didn't realize it was a limitation for other distros, but that's why I asked. Crap, I had another question and it went right out of my head. It'll come back to me.
Great. Well, we are.
Oh, it came back.
Sorry.
Sorry.
There it is.
I know probably I should be the person who knows the answer to this, but does anybody have any status update on where we're at with performance testing with Golang TIFF?
I didn't have time to look into it. Like I tried like using it to like change our build image to use the head of Go, but like failed, and I failed, and I didn't have more time to like spend on it. So
this is back to if we go to Golang TIFF, it turns out we have to like alter the code base to compile with it, that sort of stuff.
Yes.
Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think like Jeff Grafton or somebody expressed an interest from the test infra side of helping this, but we have the open question of how would we maintain a tree that works with Golang tip while still allowing the main development tree to be developed against the vetted version of Golang, right?
I think that's like, we can have 2 images for building, so I think that should be doable. Like,
I would agree with you in principle, except we just discussed how we can't roll back to Golang 1.7. So sounds like theoretically we could end up in situations where Golang tip has a breaking change in it that's not in the stable version of Go, and the source might need to change in order to accommodate that.
yeah, but I think that the argument behind running this like Go tip, right, builds with Go tip is that we can discover things that we don't like, and we can like report them before they actually cut the release.
I'm just anticipating if we go to the Golang guys and we're like, look, this is really going to hold up the Kubernetes release. Could you really, really, really do a patch release? They're going to push back and say, could you really, really, really test against Go earlier so we're not in this situation? I just want to make sure we have a story for them.
Well, it'd be nice if like some of the Golang people, I mean, this is the largest Golang project that exists, right? So
Yes.
like, it'd be nice if some of the people who work at a company that rhymes with frugal were possibly to invest some folks that help write the language spec to be involved in the project so that they can, because everybody's time is limited. I don't know if Wojtek's gonna have enough time to dig through every issue against tip, right, that occurs.
I agree. I think that's a totally valid way of phrasing it. Okay. Well, I don't think any of that stuff's going to come up at community. I was just curious. Thanks for letting me carry us later than 9:30.
All right. I think we're done for today.
Yep.
All right. See you at community.
Thanks all.
Thanks. See you.